The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet, and yet it's still the least explored frontier. Beneath the waves may lie secrets older than history itself, forgotten civilizations, sunken cities, and myths that refuse to die. And among them, one legend stands above the rest: Atlantis. Was it a real empire swallowed by the sea, or just a warning told by Plato? In this video, we'll dive deep into the mystery, the theories, and the truth behind one of the greatest legends of all time. So before we begin, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and ring the bell, because you won't want to miss this journey into the lost world of Atlantis. Let's dive in. The ocean is vast, covering more than 2/3 of our planet. It is a world that hides secrets older than human memory. A place where sunlight fades and darkness swallows everything. Beneath the waves lie mountains taller than Everest, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and plains larger than continents. And yet, despite our satellites, submarines, and technology, the ocean still guards mysteries that humanity has never solved. Throughout history, the sea has been a source of both wonder and fear. It provides life, but it also takes it away. Countless ships have vanished into its depths, leaving behind no trace but whispers and speculation. And it is within this world of mystery that the legend of Atlantis was born. A story of a mighty empire that once ruled the seas, only to vanish without a trace. Atlantis is not just a myth, it is one of the most enduring stories ever told. For more than 2,000 years, the idea of a lost world beneath the waves has fascinated philosophers, scientists, explorers, and ordinary people alike. The name Atlantis conjures visions of grand cities shining with gold, of majestic temples built for the gods, of ships sailing across every ocean, and of a people who possessed knowledge and power beyond comprehension. But the legend is also a tragedy. According to the ancient account, Atlantis was a civilization that rose to greatness, only to be consumed by its own pride. The gods, angered by the arrogance of the Atlanteans, unleashed destruction. Earthquakes tore the land apart, volcanoes erupted, the ocean swallowed the island, and in a single day and night of catastrophe, Atlantis disappeared beneath the waves. Yet the mystery of Atlantis is not just about a sunken island. It is about the questions it raises. Was it real, or was it fiction? Was it a memory of some forgotten civilization passed down through myths until it reached the philosopher Plato, who first wrote about it? Or was it nothing more than a parable, a story designed to teach a lesson about human weakness, greed, and the danger of hubris? This is what makes Atlantis so powerful as a legend. It sits on the boundary between myth and history. It is both possible and impossible at the same time. On one hand, there is no definitive proof that Atlantis ever existed. On the other, the story feels too vivid, too detailed, to be dismissed entirely. Somewhere between the truth and the imagination, Atlantis continues to live. And think about this. Every culture in the world seems to have a similar story. From the Mesopotamian flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical story of Noah, to the Indian myths of great floods and sunken cities, humanity has always remembered something: a disaster, a world lost to water. Could Atlantis be just one version of that universal memory? Or was it the first great civilization, a real place whose memory echoed across continents and centuries? Another reason Atlantis continues to captivate us is because it embodies the ultimate dream of discovery. Imagine, just for a moment, if divers found a vast ruined city deep beneath the ocean, streets paved in marble, statues of forgotten gods, and walls carved with symbols no one can read. It would change everything we know about history. It would prove that human civilization is far older and far more complex than we have ever believed. But there is also the darker side of the legend. Atlantis is not only about greatness, it is about downfall. The Atlanteans were said to be powerful, wealthy, and wise, but over time, they became greedy and corrupt. They lost their sense of justice. They waged wars to expand their empire. In their arrogance, they believed themselves greater than even the gods, and that arrogance led to their destruction. In this way, Atlantis is a mirror. It is not just the story of a lost island. It is a warning to us all. Civilizations rise, but civilizations also fall. No matter how advanced a society becomes, it is never invincible. The same forces that built Atlantis destroyed it, and the same might happen to us. In this sense, the story of Atlantis is timeless because it is the story of human nature itself. This is why, centuries later, we still speak of Atlantis. Writers have retold the story again and again. Explorers have searched the seas for signs of the lost world. Scientists have debated whether Plato's account could be based on real geological events. And dreamers, countless dreamers, still imagine Atlantis rising from the ocean, waiting to be discovered. So, as we begin this journey, we will dive deep into every aspect of the legend. We will examine Plato's writings, the very first source of the story. We will explore the possible locations of Atlantis, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean, from the Caribbean to even Antarctica. We will look at ancient myths from around the world that seem to echo the same tale of a great flood and a lost golden age. We will examine the theories of archaeologists, geologists, and historians. And we will explore how Atlantis has inspired art, literature, and popular culture, keeping the story alive for thousands of years. Perhaps we will never know the truth. Perhaps Atlantis is only a dream, a fantasy that lives in the imagination of humanity. But perhaps, just perhaps, there is something more. Somewhere in the depths of the ocean, beneath layers of sand and stone, the ruins of a forgotten world may still be waiting. Atlantis is more than a story. It is a symbol. A symbol of greatness, of mystery, of hope, but also of downfall. It challenges us to ask, could it happen again? Could we, like the Atlantis, one day vanish beneath the waves of time, leaving behind nothing but ruins and legends? This is the mystery of Atlantis, and this is where our journey begins. When we speak of Atlantis, we must always begin with a single name, Plato. Without him, there would be no story. No grand empire lost beneath the sea. No endless debates about its location. No visions of a sunken golden age. All of it, everything we know about Atlantis, comes from the words of this ancient Greek philosopher, written more than 2,000 years ago. Plato lived in the 4th century BCE, a time when Athens was at the heart of Greek culture, philosophy, and politics. He was a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, one of the most influential thinkers in human history. His works shaped Western philosophy, ethics, and political thought. But among his many writings, dialogues that explore justice, truth, and the nature of reality, two stand out for an entirely different reason. These are the dialogues Timaeus and Critias, and it is within their pages that Atlantis first appears. In Timaeus, Plato introduces the story. The setting is a discussion between Socrates and several of his companions about the ideal state. As part of this conversation, Critias, one of the characters, begins to tell an ancient tale passed down from his family. He claims that the story originates in Egypt, where priests preserved knowledge of the distant past, knowledge that the Greeks had long forgotten. According to these Egyptian priests, there once was a great and powerful empire located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, the strait we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. This empire was Atlantis. Plato describes Atlantis as larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. It was an island continent, positioned in the Atlantic Ocean, flourishing with resources and wealth. Its people were powerful and ambitious, ruling over many other islands and parts of the Mediterranean. But their ambitions eventually brought them into conflict with Athens itself. In Critias, Plato provides far more detail. Here, Atlantis is described as a true marvel of human achievement. At the center of the island was a great plain, rich in soil, surrounded by mountains that provided protection. The capital city was built in a series of concentric rings, alternating circles of land and water connected by bridges and canals. At the very heart of the city stood a magnificent temple dedicated to Poseidon, the god of the sea, built with walls of precious metals and a roof that seemed to shine with silver. Statues of gold adorned the halls, and the great statue of Poseidon himself towered over the temple, riding a chariot pulled by winged horses. The Atlanteans, according to Plato, were descendants of Poseidon. The god had fallen in love with a mortal woman, Cleito, and together they had 10 sons. These sons became the kings of Atlantis, dividing the island into 10 regions, each ruled by one of them. Yet despite their separation, they were bound together by law and custom, creating a powerful confederation. For generations, the Atlanteans lived in prosperity, guided by wisdom and strength. Their navy was unmatched. Their wealth seemed limitless. They had everything a civilization could dream of: fertile land, rich minerals, advanced architecture, and strong governance. But over time, their virtues began to fade. The Atlanteans, once noble and just, became corrupted by greed and ambition. They sought to expand their empire, to dominate other nations. In this tale, the Athenians stood against the overwhelming might of Atlantis. Though vastly outnumbered, they fought bravely, embodying justice and honor. And in the end, it was Athens that triumphed. The Atlantean Empire fell in battle, unable to conquer a people whose values were stronger than their armies. But the story does not end there. After their defeat, nature itself delivered the final blow. Earthquakes shook the land, floods rose, and, in a single day and night of disaster, the island of Atlantis sank beneath the sea, vanishing forever. This is Plato's account in its essence. But it leaves us with questions. Was Plato recounting a true historical memory, passed down through Egyptian priests? Or was he creating an allegory, a symbolic story designed to teach a moral lesson? Most historians believe the latter. They argue that Atlantis was Plato's invention, a parable about the dangers of hubris and corruption. In this interpretation, Atlantis represents an ideal state gone wrong, a society that collapses because it forgets justice and virtue. Athens, meanwhile, is portrayed as the ideal society, resisting tyranny and standing firm in the face of overwhelming odds. But others are not so sure. They point out that Plato's description of Atlantis is extremely detailed, more so than many of his other allegories. He provides measurements, distances, and intricate geography. He names rivers, mountains, and regions. Why would he invent so many specifics if it was only meant to be symbolic? And why insist that the story came from Egyptian priests who supposedly preserved it as history? This tension has fueled centuries of debate. If Atlantis was purely symbolic, then it remains only a moral tale. But if Plato was drawing on real memories, however distorted, then the possibility of a lost civilization suddenly becomes much more intriguing. Another question arises: why did Plato never finish the story? The dialogue Critias, which provides the rich description of Atlantis, breaks off abruptly. The text ends in mid-sentence, leaving readers wondering whether Plato died before completing it or simply chose to stop. Some scholars believe he intended to write a third dialogue, Hermocrates, which would have concluded the story. But if he did, it was lost to time. This unfinished nature adds another layer of mystery to the tale. For many, Plato's account remains the strongest piece of evidence that Atlantis might have been real. After all, he was not known as a writer of fairy tales. He was a philosopher, a thinker concerned with truth and meaning. Would a man of his stature simply invent such a vivid story? Or was he, as some believe, preserving a fragment of history that had reached him from the distant past? In the end, we cannot know for sure. But what we do know is this: Plato's words lit a spark that has never gone out. His story of Atlantis, written over 2 millennia ago, continues to inspire exploration, research, and imagination. Whether allegory or reality, it is his account that gave birth to the legend. And without him, the name Atlantis might have been forgotten forever. If Plato's account gave us only the name Atlantis, the story would likely have faded long ago. But what makes the legend unforgettable is his breathtaking description of the city itself, a vision of wealth, order, and beauty unlike anything else in the ancient world. It is here, in his words, that Atlantis becomes more than just an idea. It becomes a living, breathing place. Plato tells us that the island of Atlantis was vast, larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. At its heart lay a great plain, fertile, rich, and carefully divided into districts for farming and governance. Surrounding this plain were mountains that rose like natural fortresses, filled with forests, rivers, and precious metals. The island, in every sense, was designed for greatness. But it was the capital city, located at the very center, that captured the imagination of generations. Plato describes it in extraordinary detail, a series of concentric rings of land and water, perfectly engineered to blend beauty with defense. 3 rings of ocean surrounded 2 rings of land, with bridges and canals connecting them all. The outermost canal connected directly to the sea, allowing ships to pass into the heart of the city. From above, it would have looked like a vast target painted upon the earth, each ring gleaming with activity, trade, and life. Yes, the pain has no right to adapt. This is land at the sea. At the center of this design was the great Acropolis, the royal palace and the secret temple of Poseidon. According to Plato, this temple was no ordinary structure. Its walls shimmered with silver, while its pinnacles glowed with orichalcum, a mysterious metal said to be second only to gold in value. Inside, golden statues lined the halls, and at the very heart stood an enormous statue of Poseidon himself, riding a chariot coaled by winged horses, so tall that his head brushed the ceiling. It was not merely a place of worship. It was a symbol of the Atlanteans' identity, a reminder that they were the children of a god. The palace was equally magnificent. It stretched across the central island, adorned with gardens, fountains, and courtyards. The kings of Atlantis lived in luxury, surrounded by art and architecture that reflected both their wealth and their divine heritage. But the palace was also a seat of power. Here, the 10 kings of Atlantis, descendants of Poseidon, met to deliberate, to pass laws, and to renew their vows of unity. At the entrance stood a pillar of pure orichalcum, upon which were engraved the laws of Atlantis. These laws bound the rulers to act with justice, wisdom, and moderation, at least in the beginning. Beyond the palace and temple, the rings of the city bustled with life. The outer canals served as harbors, filled with ships arriving from distant lands. Merchants sold goods from across the known world, spices, grains, livestock, and metals. Craftsmen worked with bronze, iron, and orichalcum, creating weapons, tools, and ornaments. The city was not only a center of power, it was the beating heart of global trade. And then there was the land itself. The fertile plain produced crops in abundance, aided by a remarkable system of irrigation. Canals carried water across the fields, ensuring that harvests were steady and reliable. Forests in the surrounding mountains provided timber for shipbuilding, while mines yielded gold, silver, and precious stones. The Atlanteans had everything they needed: resources, technology, and natural defenses. It is little wonder, then, that Plato describes them as unmatched among the nations of the world. But what is perhaps most striking about this description is its precision. Plato provides measurements: the size of the plain, the width of the canals, the dimensions of the rings. To many, this level of detail suggests that he was not merely inventing a story, but recording something he believed to be real. Could Plato have heard descriptions of an actual city, perhaps passed down through Egyptian records, and woven them into his tale? To modern readers, the city of Atlantis feels almost futuristic. The use of concentric rings resembles designs of utopian cities in later centuries, with clear zoning for trade, defense, and governance. The emphasis on canals and waterways suggests a people highly skilled in engineering, perhaps even more advanced than their contemporaries in Greece, Egypt, or Mesopotamia. It is no wonder that so many have speculated that Atlantis was more than myth, that it was a real city, a marvel of ancient technology. Of course, skeptics point out another possibility: that Plato's description was deliberately idealized, a vision of the perfect city. The concentric rings, after all, symbolize harmony and balance. The temple of Poseidon reflects divine order. The engraved laws of Orichalcum symbolize justice. In this interpretation, Atlantis is not meant to be real. It is a canvas upon which Plato painted his philosophy. To him, the city was not about archaeology, but about morality, a warning of how even the greatest society can fall if it strays from virtue. And yet, whether real or symbolic, the image of Atlantis remains powerful. Imagine walking through those shining streets, hearing the clang of craftsmen in their forges, smelling the spices of faraway lands in the markets, and seeing the colossal statue of Poseidon looming over the city. Imagine watching fleets of Atlantean ships sailing out from the harbor, their sails filled with wind, carrying the empire's influence to every corner of the world. It is easy to see why Atlantis has become the ultimate lost city in human imagination. Unlike El Dorado, it was not simply about wealth. Unlike Shangri-La, it was not simply about peace. Atlantis was all of these things: power, wealth, knowledge, and beauty, concentrated in one vision. And that is why, even today, the idea of rediscovering Atlantis continues to excite explorers and dreamers. To find it would not just be to uncover ruins, it would be to uncover the very pinnacle of what humanity could once achieve. But Plato's story also reminds us of the danger hidden beneath this splendor. The very wealth and power that made Atlantis great would eventually lead to its downfall. The shining temples, the endless resources, the mighty fleets, all of them would prove meaningless when arrogance and greed took hold. The city that seemed eternal would, in the end, last no longer than a single night. Still, for this moment, in Plato's narrative, Atlantis stands as a wonder. Its walls gleam with silver, its harbors are filled with ships, its temples shine with gold. Its people live in abundance, secure in their belief that they are favored by the gods. Whether real or imagined, Atlantis in its prime was a vision of civilization at its height. A vision that continues to haunt us with the question, what if it truly existed? A city is more than its walls and temples. What truly defines a civilization is its people, their values, their origins, and the choices they make. In the story of Atlantis, it is the Atlanteans themselves who elevate the empire to greatness, but also who sow the seeds of its eventual downfall. To understand Atlantis, we must understand them. According to Plato, the origins of the Atlantean people were nothing short of divine. The god Poseidon, ruler of the seas, fell in love with a mortal woman named Cleito. She lived on a small hill at the center of the island, untouched by outsiders. To protect her, Poseidon surrounded the hill with 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land, a design that would later become the model for the entire capital city. From their union came 10 sons, who would become the first kings of Atlantis. Each son was given a portion of the island to rule, but they remained bound together by law, loyalty, and blood. The eldest, Atlas, gave his name to both the island and the ocean beyond. This divine lineage, half god and half mortal, gave the Atlatans a sense of destiny. They were not ordinary men. They were children of a god, and in their veins ran the power of both heaven and earth. For generations, this heritage shaped the culture of Atlantis. The Atlanteans lived in harmony with one another, guided by the laws inscribed on the sacred pillar of Orichalcum. These laws emphasized justice, moderation, and unity. They forbade the kings from waging war against each other, from seeking power beyond their rightful share, or from breaking their oaths to the gods. And for a time, the Atlanteans obeyed. They were wise, noble, and prosperous. Their society reflected this balance. Farmers cultivated the fertile plains, producing food in abundance. Craftsmen forged tools, weapons, and ornaments from metals drawn from the mountains. Merchants carried goods across seas in vast fleets, returning with treasures from distant lands. Priests oversaw rituals in the Temple of Poseidon, ensuring that the people honored their divine ancestry. Warriors defended the realm, not for conquest but for protection. And above all, the kings ruled together in council, ensuring that no single man could dominate the others. In this golden age, Atlantis became a model of prosperity and order. Its people were disciplined yet creative, devout yet practical. They lived not in excess, but in abundance, enjoying the gifts of their land without succumbing to greed. They believed themselves chosen, and in many ways, they lived up to that belief. But as Plato warns, human nature is never constant. Over time, the divine blood of Poseidon became diluted, as the descendants of the kings married mortals. With each generation, the Atlanteans grew less godlike and more human. Their virtues began to fade. Ambition replaced moderation. Greed replaced justice. Power became more important than wisdom. The change was gradual, but inevitable. At first, it showed in small ways. Disputes among the kings, laws bent for convenience, wealth flaunted for prestige. But soon, the corruption spread deeper. The Atlanteans, once content to rule their island and its neighbors, turned outward with hunger. They sought to expand their empire, to dominate other nations, to control the world beyond their shores. Their fleets, once used for trade, became instruments of war. Their warriors, once defenders, became conquerors. The kings, once united, began to compete for glory. And the people themselves, once humble, grew arrogant. They believed that their divine ancestry gave them the right to rule over all others. This was the fatal flaw of Atlantis. The belief that greatness is eternal, that power can never be lost. In their pride, they forgot the very laws that had made them strong. They no longer honored Poseidon with devotion, but used his name to justify their ambitions. They no longer sought wisdom, but only victory. Plato tells us that the gods looked down upon Atlantis and saw a people who had fallen from grace. The divine spark in their blood had dimmed, and what remained was a civilization corrupted by its own success. And so, judgment came. But before the disaster, there was one final act, the war with Athens. In Plato's account, the Athenians represented the opposite of Atlantis. They were poor, less powerful, and far smaller in number. But they still held to virtue, to justice, to courage. When Atlantis sought to conquer them, Athens resisted. Against overwhelming odds, they stood firm. And in the end, it was Athens that prevailed, proving that true strength lies not in wealth or armies, but in character. This clash between Atlantis and Athens was not merely a battle of nations. It was a battle of values. Arrogance versus humility, corruption versus justice, pride versus virtue. And it was a warning from Plato to his own people. Athens too had once been great, but it risked the same fate if it allowed greed and ambition to eclipse its principles. The story of the Atlanteans, then, is not simply a tale of people long vanished. It is a reflection of human nature itself. We are capable of extraordinary greatness, but also of terrible corruption. We build cities of wonder, but we also destroy them. We seek wisdom, but we are often seduced by power. The Atlanteans were not monsters or gods. They were human, perhaps too human. In many ways, the people of Atlantis mirror our own societies today. We live in an age of abundance, with technologies that rival even Plato's wildest dreams. We build cities of steel and glass, we harness the power of the atom, we reach into space. And yet, we face the same temptations: greed, corruption, arrogance. Perhaps that is why the story of Atlantis still resonates. It is not just about the past, it is about the future. For in the end, the decline of Atlantis was not caused by nature alone. It was not the earthquakes, the floods, or the sea that doomed them. Those were only the instruments of their destruction. The true cause was within them: the slow erosion of virtue, the loss of balance, the arrogance that blinded them to their own fragility. And so, when the waves finally rose, Atlantis was already doomed. Its people had become a shadow of what they once were, their greatness hollow, their destiny squandered. The empire that had once seemed eternal vanished in a single night, leaving behind nothing but ruins buried beneath the sea, and a lesson written in myth, that no civilization, no matter how powerful, can escape the consequences of its own choices. This was the story of the Atlanteans, their divine origins, their golden age, their corruption, and their fall. They remind us that civilizations are fragile, that greatness is never guaranteed, and that the true strength of a people lies not in wealth or armies, but in their values. And it is here, with the Atlanteans standing at the height of their power, but already sowing the seeds of their destruction, that we turn to the next chapter, the war with Athens, the final confrontation between pride and virtue. Every legend has its turning point, a moment when the seeds of downfall begin to bear fruit. For Atlantis, that moment came when its ambitions grew too great. Wealth, abundance, and divine ancestry had convinced the Atlanteans that they were destined to rule not only their island, but the entire world. And so, they turned their gaze outward, across the seas, toward new conquests. At first, their expansion was gradual. They extended influence to neighboring islands, then to distant shores. Their fleets, unmatched in size and speed, carried armies across the Mediterranean. Coastal cities fell before them, and kingdoms either submitted or were destroyed. Piece by piece, the Atlantean Empire spread across the known world. Plato tells us that by this time, Atlantis controlled much of North Africa as far as Egypt, and parts of Europe as far as Italy. Their dominion stretched like a shadow over the Mediterranean. To many, they seemed unstoppable, a superpower whose armies were as vast as their ambitions. But not everyone would bow to them. Beyond the Pillars of Heracles, on the other side of the sea, lay a city that would become their greatest opponent, Athens. At the time, Athens was not the mighty empire it would later become. It was still a young city, small compared to the vast dominion of Atlantis. It lacked the wealth, the fleets, and the armies of its enemy. And yet, according to Plato, Athens possessed something that the Atlantis had long since lost: virtue, courage, and justice. The Athenians, though fewer in number, were united in spirit. They valued freedom above conquest, discipline above excess, and honor above greed. In Plato's telling, Athens stood as the model of the ideal state, the very vision of society he often explored in his philosophy. And when Atlantis sought to conquer them, the Athenians rose to defend their land with a determination that would surprise the world. The war that followed was no ordinary conflict. It was a clash not just of armies, but of values. On one side stood Atlantis, mighty, wealthy, and arrogant. On the other side stood Athens, small, modest, but virtuous. It was the ultimate test. Could a just society withstand the onslaught of an empire that seemed invincible? Plato's account tells us that the Athenians fought with unmatched bravery. Their soldiers, though outnumbered, held their ground against the Atlantean invaders. Their leaders, chosen for wisdom and courage, inspired their people to resist, no matter the odds. And slowly, against all expectations, Athens began to prevail. The battles were fierce. Atlantean ships filled the seas, their sails blotting out the horizon. Their armies landed on foreign shores, bringing fire and destruction. But the Athenians met them with discipline and strategy. Where Atlantis relied on sheer numbers and brute force, Athens relied on clever tactics, unity, and unshakable belief in their cause. In the end, the impossible happened. The Athenians defeated Atlantis. The empire that had subdued nations across 2 continents was turned back by a single city. Plato describes this as the triumph of virtue over corruption, of justice over greed. It was not merely a military victory, but a moral one. Athens had shown that true greatness does not lie in wealth or armies, but in the spirit of a people who fight for what is right. For Atlantis, this defeat was a humiliation. Their image of invincibility was shattered. Their arrogance, once their strength, had become their weakness. The empire that had believed itself destined to rule the world had been checked by a far smaller foe. And yet, the story does not end with this war. The defeat of Atlantis was only the prelude to something far greater and far more final. For soon after their loss, nature itself delivered the ultimate blow. Plato tells us that, in the days following the war, Atlantis was struck by catastrophe. Earthquakes shook the land, volcanoes erupted, the sea rose in towering waves. And in the single day and night of disaster, the island of Atlantis sank beneath the ocean, vanishing forever. To some, this sequence is symbolic. The war with Athens represents the moral defeat of arrogance, while the natural disaster represents the inevitable collapse of a corrupt society. In this interpretation, Plato crafted Atlantis as a parable, a warning to his own people that no empire, no matter how great, is immune to downfall. But others see something more. They wonder, could there have been a real event behind the story? Could a natural disaster, an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, or a massive tsunami have destroyed a civilization so completely that only legend remained? And could Athens, or another city like it, truly have faced such an enemy and survived? The war between Atlantis and Athens remains one of the most fascinating parts of the legend. It is a battle that transcends history and enters the realm of timeless myth. On one side, the arrogance of unchecked power. On the other, the resilience of a people united by justice. It is the eternal struggle between hubris and humility, one that echoes throughout human history. Think of the great empires of the past. Rome, which fell despite its legions. The Mongol Empire, which crumbled despite its conquests. Again and again, history shows us that no empire is eternal. Atlantis, in Plato's story, was only the first to learn this truth. And so, as the legend goes, the Athenians stood victorious, while Atlantis, broken and humiliated, prepared to face its final judgment. Whether or not the story is historical, its meaning is clear. The true measure of a civilization is not its armies or its wealth, but its values. Without virtue, even the mightiest empire will fall. The war between Atlantis and Athens was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of the end. For now, we turn to the next chapter, the catastrophe that would erase Atlantis from the face of the earth and consign it to memory, legend, and myth. Every empire believes it will last forever. Every city imagines that its walls are unbreakable, its temples eternal. But history and myth remind us that nothing created by human hands is beyond destruction. For Atlantis, the end came suddenly, violently, and without mercy. Plato describes it with chilling simplicity. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea. These words, brief as they are, capture one of the most haunting images in human imagination: a mighty civilization swallowed whole by the ocean. But what exactly happened? How did an island so vast, so advanced, vanish in the blink of an eye? The story tells us that after their humiliating defeat in the war with Athens, the Atlanteans turned inward. Their pride wounded, they clung even more fiercely to their wealth and power. Yet beneath the surface of their glittering capital, cracks were forming, both literal and symbolic. Earthquakes shook the ground, strange tremors rippled through the island, fires burned in the mountains, and the air filled with ash. The seas, once calm and obedient, began to rage with unusual fury. To the priests and the wise, these were signs of the gods' displeasure. To the common people, they were omens of something far worse. And then it came. According to Plato, Atlantis perished in a single night. Imagine it, the ground splitting open with a deafening roar, buildings crumbling as though made of sand, flames leaping from beneath the earth. Rivers boiled, mountains shattered, and the very heart of the island seemed to break apart. Then came the sea. Walls of water rose higher than temples, higher than palaces. In an instant, they swept across the land, crushing everything in their path. Ships were hurled inland like toys. Entire villages were erased without a trace. The great capital, with its concentric rings of land and sea, disappeared beneath the waves. The cries of thousands filled the air, only to be silenced as the waters swallowed them. The temples, the palaces, the statues of gold and orichalcum, all were dragged into the deep. By dawn, nothing remained but an endless, empty sea. The island of Atlantis was gone. Was this catastrophe an act of nature, or the judgment of the gods? Plato's account suggests both. The destruction was physical: earthquakes, floods, fire. But behind these forces, he saw a deeper meaning. To him, Atlantis fell because its people had fallen. They had abandoned virtue, embraced greed, and turned their backs on justice. The disaster was not random. It was a cosmic punishment, a warning to all who would follow their path. Yet modern readers often wonder, could there be a natural explanation? Some point to volcanic eruptions, like the catastrophic explosion of Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 BC, which destroyed an advanced civilization in a single event. Others suggest tsunamis, earthquakes, or shifting tectonic plates. Perhaps Plato drew upon real memories of such disasters, transforming them into the myth of Atlantis. If so, then Atlantis may not have been a moral tale alone, but also a cultural memory of how fragile human achievements truly are. Civilizations can rise to greatness, but nature, with its storms, its quakes, its floods, can erase them in moments. The destruction of Atlantis was total. Unlike other civilizations that leave behind ruins, inscriptions, or legends preserved by descendants, Atlantis left nothing. No survivors, no cities, no temples. Only the ocean remained, covering what had once been the most powerful empire of its time. To the Athenians, who had fought against Atlantis, the disaster may have seemed like divine justice. Their smaller, humbler city had survived, while the mighty empire had been erased. To Plato, this was the ultimate lesson, that arrogance invites destruction, and that no society, however great, can defy the balance of the universe. But to us, the story remains both haunting and mysterious. Was Atlantis real and truly destroyed by some ancient catastrophe? Or was it always only an allegory, a story invented by Plato to teach a lesson? Either way, the image of an entire world vanishing into the sea continues to captivate us. The fall of Atlantis is more than just a story of disaster. It is a mirror held up to every civilization that has ever believed itself invincible. The Atlanteans built marvels, commanded armies, and ruled empires. But when they lost their virtue, they lost everything. Their temples turned to rubble, their cities to sand, their empire to myth. This is why the tale endures. It speaks to a fear we all share, that no matter how advanced, how secure, how powerful we believe ourselves to be, we too are vulnerable. Nature can destroy us. Our own corruption can undo us. Our pride can blind us to danger until it is too late. What makes the fall of Atlantis so powerful is its mystery. If it was only a myth, why does it still resonate after thousands of years? If it was real, where are its ruins? Did an entire island truly vanish, or does it lie buried beneath the sea, waiting to be discovered? These questions will linger as long as the oceans conceal their secrets. And perhaps that is part of the story's power, not to give us answers, but to remind us of the fragility of all human greatness. In the end, the fall of Atlantis is not simply about an island sinking beneath the waves. It is about us. It is about what happens when civilizations lose sight of their values, when pride replaces humility, when greed replaces justice. It is a warning written not in stone or parchment, but in myth, a story told and retold across centuries to remind us of what we risk becoming. Atlantis may be gone, but its lesson endures. And as we look to the seas, to the ruins of past civilizations, and even to our own modern world, we are left to wonder, will we repeat their mistakes, or will we learn from them? When Atlantis vanished within the waves, so too did its people, its cities, and its monuments. Unlike the ruins of Egypt or Mesopotamia, no stone remains to testify to its greatness. And yet, the story of Atlantis survived, not through ruins, but through words. Through Plato's writings, the memory of the lost island echoed across the centuries. But how exactly was Atlantis remembered? Did the world treat it as history, as myth, or as something in between? To answer that, we must look at how different cultures, philosophers, and thinkers interpreted the legend. The first and most important custodian of the tale was, of course, Plato himself. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, he set down the story of Atlantis as told to him through a chain of tradition. According to Plato, the story came originally from Egyptian priests who shared it with the Athenian statesman Solon. Solon then passed it down until it eventually reached Plato's family and finally appeared in his philosophical works. For Plato, Atlantis was not just a tale of wonder, it was a moral parable. The Atlanteans, once noble, had become corrupted by wealth and ambition. Their arrogance led them into war with Athens, and their defeat was followed by divine punishment, the island's destruction. To Plato's students and readers, the meaning was clear. Greatness without virtue is doomed to fall. His story was less about geography and more about ethics, less about where Atlantis was and more about why it fell. But, as with many myths, people did not always focus on the lesson. Instead, they became fascinated by the mystery. Could Atlantis have been real? Among Plato's contemporaries and successors, reactions were divided. Some philosophers treated the story as pure allegory, a fictional creation meant to illustrate a point. Others, however, wondered if it contained fragments of real history. The Greek historian Crater, writing a century after Plato, claimed that Egyptian records did indeed describe Atlantis, lending credibility to the tale. Others, like Aristotle, are said to have dismissed it entirely, calling it a fable. The Romans, inheriting Greek philosophy, also encountered the story. To them, it became one more example of the rise and fall of great powers, a theme that resonated deeply with an empire that itself feared collapse. But they too left Atlantis in the realm of legend, rather than history. For many centuries after the fall of Rome, the story of Atlantis lay mostly forgotten in Europe. The Middle Ages, focused on religious texts and biblical history, had little room for tales of sunken islands. Some Christian scholars, however, reinterpreted the legend in biblical terms, suggesting that Atlantis might have been destroyed in the flood of Noah. Yet for the most part, the story remained in the background, waiting for rediscovery. It was during the Renaissance, an era obsessed with rediscovering the wisdom of the ancients, that Atlantis re-emerged. As scholars pored over Greek texts, Plato's works were studied with new enthusiasm. Explorers, too, began to wonder. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic and found new lands, some speculated, were the Americas the remains of Atlantis? Was this what Plato had been describing all along? Suddenly, the idea of Atlantis was no longer just philosophy. It became a geographical puzzle, a mystery waiting to be solved. Writers like Francis Bacon fueled this fascination with his 1627 work, The New Atlantis, which imagined a utopian society on a hidden island. Though not meant as a literal retelling, Bacon's vision gave new life to the legend. Atlantis became not just a story of destruction, but a dream of human progress and hidden knowledge. As centuries passed, Atlantis became a canvas upon which different cultures painted their hopes, fears, and imaginations. For some, it was a lost paradise, proof that humanity had once achieved greatness far beyond our own. For others, it was a cautionary tale, warning of the dangers of pride and corruption. The absence of physical evidence only deepened the mystery. Unlike Troy, which was eventually unearthed after centuries of being considered a myth, Atlantis left no ruins to confirm its existence. This very absence kept the story alive. People could imagine it anywhere, in the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, or even Antarctica. Each new theory kept the legend fresh, alive, and endlessly debatable.
Why then did the story of Atlantis endure, while so many other myths faded away? The answer lies in its universal themes. Atlantis is not just the tale of a city sinking into the sea.
It is the tale of human ambition, of greatness corrupted, of sudden downfall. Every culture, every society, can see itself in the mirror of Atlantis. And every generation, facing its own challenges, can ask the same question: are we too on the path to becoming another Atlantis? Plato may not have intended it, but his story transcended philosophy. It became an archetype, a pattern repeated throughout history. Rome, the Maya, the Khmer Empire, each rose, each achieved greatness, and each fell. In every fall, people could hear an echo of Atlantis. By the time the modern era dawned, Atlantis was no longer just a story. It was a legend that inspired explorers, writers, and even scientists. Maps were drawn with Atlantis marked in the middle of the ocean. Adventurers sailed in search of it. Philosophers debated whether it had truly existed. And ordinary people, sitting by candlelight, told tales of the sunken empire that lay hidden beneath the waves. In truth, Atlantis may never have existed. It may have been no more than Plato's invention, a cautionary tale disguised as history. But in a way, that hardly matters, for what Plato created was something far more powerful than a city. He created an idea that has lived for over 2,000 years, shaping dreams, inspiring quests, and reminding humanity of both its potential and its fragility. And so, long after Atlantis sank, its story continued to rise. In philosophy, in literature, in exploration, in imagination, the legend refused to die. Even without ruins, even without proof, Atlantis became eternal. Perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. The empire that believed itself immortal was destroyed in a single night, and yet, through story, through memory, through myth, it achieved a kind of immortality after all. Atlantis may be gone from the earth, but it will never be gone from the human mind. When Plato first spoke of Atlantis, he gave details that seemed specific enough to inspire centuries of speculation. He described an island larger than Libya and Asia combined, situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient name for the Strait of Gibraltar. From there, the great empire extended its influence across the seas. With such a vivid description, it was inevitable that people would try to place Atlantis on a map. For some, the most natural location has always been the Atlantic Ocean itself. After all, the very name, Atlantis, suggests such a connection. Ancient geographers imagined a vast island in the middle of that ocean, now swallowed by the sea. When explorers like Columbus and his successors reached the Americas, many wondered if these new lands were in fact the remains of Atlantis. The vast size, the unfamiliar peoples, and the riches of the Americas seemed to match Plato's hints of a great world beyond the Mediterranean. For centuries, theories linked Atlantis to South America, Mexico, or the Caribbean islands. Even today, some still search for ruins beneath the waves near Cuba or the Bahamas, hoping to find traces of the lost city. Others turn their eyes closer to home. The volcanic island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea has long been proposed as the real Atlantis. Around 1600 BCE, the island, then known as Thera, was devastated by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history. Entire settlements were buried in ash, and the eruption sent tsunamis crashing across the Mediterranean. To some scholars, this matched Plato's description of a civilization destroyed in a single night. The sophisticated Minoan culture on Crete, which suffered from this disaster, could have inspired the story of Atlantis. Though Santorini is far smaller than Plato's Atlantis, its sudden and violent destruction offers a plausible parallel. Further afield, others pointed to the Azores, a chain of islands in the Atlantic, as potential remnants of a sunken continent. Seafarers imagined these peaks as the last fragments of a drowned landmass that once stretched across the ocean. In the 19th century, when scientists began to study continental drift and ocean geology, some even speculated about a lost continent beneath the waves. Though modern geology has since dismissed the idea of a sunken continent in the Atlantic, the notion captured the imagination for decades. Some theorists have looked not west, but south. The coast of Africa, with its deserts and mysteries, has been proposed as a possible site. In recent years, attention has turned to the so-called Eye of the Sahara, or the Richat structure, in Mauritania. From above, this massive circular formation resembles Plato's description of Atlantis's concentric rings of land and sea. Could this strange geological feature once have been a thriving city, later eroded by time and buried beneath sand? Well, enthusiasts argue that its shape, size, and location in relation to the Atlantic make it a compelling candidate, though mainstream scholars remain skeptical. Even Antarctica has entered the conversation. Some 20th century theories suggested that Atlantis might lie beneath the frozen continent. According to this view, thousands of years ago Antarctica was free of ice, home to an advanced civilization, before a sudden shift in the Earth's crust plunged it into its current icy prison. This idea, though highly speculative and unsupported by evidence, continues to fascinate those who see Atlantis not merely as myth, but as a mystery of lost human history. But what if Atlantis was not a literal island at all? Some have argued that Plato's account was entirely symbolic. For them, Atlantis never existed as a physical place. Instead, it was a parable created by Plato to illustrate the dangers of hubris and corruption. The details of geography and empire were meant not as history, but as allegory. To this school of thought, the search for Atlantis on maps or beneath the seas is misguided. The real Atlantis exists in the moral of the story, not in the rocks or ruins. Yet the allure of a real Atlantis remains powerful. Over the centuries, countless explorers have claimed to discover its ruins, from underwater structures off the coast of Spain to strange stone formations in the Caribbean. Each new discovery sparks debate. Are these natural formations or the remnants of something more? The ocean is vast and still largely unexplored. With so much of the seabed hidden from us, the possibility, however slim, that some ancient city lies beneath the waves continues to fuel imagination. The persistence of these theories reveals something important about the human spirit. Atlantis represents more than a lost city. It represents the dream of hidden knowledge, of a golden age buried just beyond our reach. To believe in Atlantis is to believe that history still holds secrets, that there are wonders waiting to be uncovered. Whether it lies in the depths of the Atlantic, the sands of Africa, or nowhere at all, the search for Atlantis is really a search for our own forgotten past. And so, across centuries and continents, the question remains, where could Atlantis be? What each generation proposes its own answer, reflecting its own hopes, fears, and discoveries. In the end, whether Atlantis was a real place or only a story, its legacy is not confined to the pages of Plato's dialogues. It lives in our maps, in our myths, and in our endless desire to uncover the truth about where we come from. When the age of exploration began in the late 15th century, the old world of Europe collided with the new world of the Americas. For centuries, Plato's story of Atlantis had lingered in the background of philosophical debate. But now, as ships crossed the Atlantic and returned with tales of vast lands, unfamiliar peoples, and great riches, the legend was suddenly given new life. To many Europeans, it seemed they had finally found proof of what Plato had described more than 2,000 years before. Christopher Columbus himself was not immune to such speculation. Although his voyages were driven by the search for trade routes to Asia, he and his contemporaries could not help but interpret their discoveries through the lens of classical stories. When they saw islands rising from the Atlantic, they remembered Plato's account of a great land beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Writers of the time suggested that Cuba, Hispaniola, or even the mainland of South America might be remnants of Atlantis. The name carried a sense of mystery and wonder, making these strange new places easier to frame within familiar stories. As the 16th century unfolded, the association between Atlantis and the New World only grew stronger. Scholars and explorers alike began to argue that Plato's story was not fiction but history, a distorted memory of ancient contacts between Europe and the Americas. The size of the continents across the ocean seemed to match Plato's description of a land greater than Libya and Asia combined. If the Americas had been hidden from European knowledge for so long, why could they not also be the true Atlantis? Spanish chroniclers returning from the New World described magnificent cities such as Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire, with its causeways, temples, and canals. To European eyes, it appeared as though an advanced and powerful civilization had indeed existed across the seas. Just as Plato had said, the sudden fall of the Aztecs and Incas to European conquest seemed eerily similar to the downfall of Atlantis, destroyed in a single catastrophic blow. The parallels encouraged many to link the two stories together. Others took the idea even further. Some suggested that the native peoples of the Americas were themselves descendants of Atlanteans. According to this theory, survivors of the sunken island had fled across the sea, bringing their knowledge and traditions with them. The pyramids of the Maya and the Incas were compared to the monumental architecture that Plato had described. Their calendars, mathematics, and astronomy were seen as traces of the lost wisdom of Atlantis. In this way, the legend became a tool to explain the sophistication of American civilizations without crediting them directly, instead attributing their achievements to a vanished European ancestor. The Renaissance was a time of rediscovery of ancient texts, and Plato's dialogues were studied with renewed interest. The printing press made his works more widely available, and thinkers debated whether they contained hidden truths. The discovery of the New World gave them an exciting possibility. Atlantis had not been destroyed, but rather rediscovered. Maps from this period sometimes labeled parts of the Americas as Atlas Insula, or the Island of Atlantis. It was as if the ancient myth and the modern discovery had merged into a single story. Philosophers and utopian writers of the time embraced the theme as well. In 1627, Francis Bacon published The New Atlantis, a vision of a perfect society hidden on an unknown island in the Pacific. Though not directly about Plato's Atlantis, Bacon's story reflected the same spirit, a world beyond the horizon, filled with wisdom and harmony, waiting to be revealed. Bacon's vision was less about the past than about the future, about what humanity might achieve if guided by knowledge and virtue. Yet by choosing the word Atlantis, he tapped into the powerful imagination that Plato's tale had stirred for centuries. Meanwhile, explorers continued to return from the Americas with strange artifacts, exotic plants, and accounts of peoples and traditions that seemed to defy European understanding. Each new discovery invited comparisons with Plato's lost island. Could the gold of the Inca Empire be the same treasures that once filled the temples of Atlantis? Were the vast river systems of the Amazon echoes of the canals and waterways described in Plato's concentric city? Every detail became fuel for the legend, blurring the line between myth and exploration. But not everyone was convinced. Skeptical voices argued that the link between Atlantis and the New World was nothing more than wishful thinking. They pointed out that Plato's story placed Atlantis in the Atlantic, not across a whole ocean, and that its destruction was sudden, leaving no survivors. Still, the allure of the connection was too powerful to fade. The discovery of entire continents that Europe had never known about proved that the world still held vast mysteries. If the Americas had been hidden for so long, then perhaps Atlantis too could be more than just a story. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the legend of Atlantis had become firmly tied to the idea of lost civilizations. As explorers pushed further into South America, encountering ruins in the jungles and mountains, they imagined each stone as a clue to the sunken empire. The great city of Machu Picchu, though not revealed to the outside world until centuries later, would eventually feed the same kind of speculation. To many, the Americas were a living reminder that myths could sometimes be rooted in truth. In this way, the Age of Exploration transformed Atlantis from a philosophical tale into a geographical mystery. The story no longer belonged only to scholars and philosophers. It now belonged to sailors, adventurers, and dreamers. Every new voyage carried with it the hope of finding not just gold or spices, but the ruins of a forgotten world. The maps of the Renaissance were not just charts of coastlines, but canvases of imagination, with Atlantis lurking just beyond the known horizon. And so, while Plato may have intended Atlantis as a warning, the explorers of the Renaissance and beyond turned it into a promise. A promise that there were still wonders waiting to be discovered, that the seas held secrets, and that humanity was on the brink of rediscovering a glorious past. The New World, in many ways, became the new Atlantis, not because it was truly the same, but because it fulfilled the same longing in the human heart. Atlantis was no longer just a city lost beneath the sea, but it had become a symbol for everything unknown, everything beyond the edge of the map. And as long as there were new horizons to explore, the legend of Atlantis would continue to sail with every ship that left the harbor. By the 18th century, Europe was changing. The Enlightenment had arrived, bringing with it a new spirit of reason, science, and skepticism. Thinkers of this age valued evidence, observation, and logic above tradition or myth. And yet, even in this era of rational inquiry, the story of Atlantis refused to disappear. Instead, it adapted. Philosophers, scientists, and historians reimagined the lost island in ways that reflected the intellectual currents of their time. For centuries, Atlantis had been interpreted largely through imagination and faith in ancient texts. But Enlightenment thinkers asked new questions. Was Atlantis a real place that could be studied through geography and history? Could the flood myths and cultural similarities found around the world be evidence of a shared origin? Could science, not myth, uncover the truth? Some scholars treated Plato's account with a new seriousness. They examined his writings not as allegory, but as historical record, parsing every detail for clues. The precise measurements of Atlantis, its canals and walls, its distance beyond the Pillars of Hercules, these became subjects of earnest analysis. If Plato had recorded the story, perhaps he had preserved fragments of real history passed down from ancient times. In this way, the Enlightenment's respect for reason ironically gave new legitimacy to a tale long dismissed as legend. At the same time, advances in science added fuel to the speculation. The study of geology was still young, but discoveries of seashells high in mountains and fossils of creatures no longer alive suggested that the Earth had undergone great changes. Catastrophes, floods, earthquakes, eruptions were increasingly recognized as forces that shaped the planet. If whole landscapes could be transformed in an instant, why could not an island sink beneath the sea? Atlantis became a convenient example in the growing debate about whether Earth was shaped by slow processes or sudden cataclysms. Meanwhile, the study of comparative mythology was beginning to emerge. Enlightenment scholars noticed that many cultures shared stories of great floods, from the biblical account of Noah to Mesopotamian, Indian, and Native American traditions. Was this simply coincidence, or did it point to a single event remembered across civilizations? For some, Atlantis provided the answer. Perhaps a massive flood had once struck humanity, erasing a great civilization and leaving behind only scattered memories in myths around the world. In this way, Atlantis became linked not just to Greek philosophy, but to a universal human story of survival and loss. The Enlightenment also expanded the horizon of human knowledge. Voyages of exploration were no longer just about trade or conquest, but about scientific discovery. Naturalists traveled the globe, cataloging plants, animals, and cultures. Each new discovery sparked fresh speculation about Atlantis. Strange artifacts, unfamiliar ruins, and sophisticated societies encountered in Africa, Asia, and the Americas were all woven into the narrative. Some suggested that Atlantis had been the cradle of civilization, its survivors spreading across the world to seed the rise of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Not all thinkers accept such ideas. One was a long-period factor, And with the tightening of King's Buyer dead, it may sense the card of canon. In fact, many leading Enlightenment philosophers were skeptical of Atlantis. They saw it as a distraction from serious inquiry, a fanciful tale unworthy of scientific attention. Voltaire, for example, mocked those who sought to locate Atlantis, arguing that Plato's story was nothing more than fiction. To him, the very persistence of the myth revealed humanity's love of wonder more than its pursuit of truth. Yet even his mockery showed how deeply the story had embedded itself in intellectual debate. Atlantis was impossible to ignore, even for skeptics. In other corners of Europe, however, Atlantis became entangled with bold new theories of human history. As scholars sought to explain the origins of culture and language, Atlantis offered an attractive possibility. Perhaps it was the original homeland of humanity, a place from which knowledge, language, and technology had spread. This diffusionist idea suggested that all great civilizations could be traced back to a single source, and Atlantis, with its supposed grandeur, was a perfect candidate. The Enlightenment also brought with it new forms of utopian thought. Writers dreamed of perfect societies guided by reason, justice, and progress. In this context, Atlantis sometimes appeared not as a lost empire, but as a vision of what humanity might achieve. It was no longer just a cautionary tale of pride and destruction, but also an inspiration, a reminder that greatness was possible. Even as science pushed people to question myths, imagination ensured that Atlantis retained its grip on the human mind. By the end of the 18th century, the legend had taken on a new life. It was no longer confined to the realms of philosophy or exploration, but had become part of broader debates about history, science, and the future of humanity. Some dismissed it as fantasy, while others embraced it as hidden truth. But whether mocked or celebrated, Atlantis had proven remarkably resilient. The Enlightenment did not destroy the legend of Atlantis. Instead, it transformed it. By placing the myth in dialogue with science, exploration, and philosophy, the thinkers of this age ensured that Atlantis remained relevant in a rapidly changing world. It was no longer simply the story of a sunken island. It had become a canvas on which each generation could project its questions and its dreams. As Europe entered the 19th century, with its revolutions, discoveries, and accelerating scientific progress, Atlantis was poised to undergo yet another transformation. Romanticism was on the horizon, and with it, a renewed hunger for mystery, imagination, and the search for lost worlds. The 19th century brought a dramatic shift in the way people thought about the past and about hidden worlds. The Enlightenment had emphasized reason and skepticism. But now, with the rise of Romanticism, imagination and mystery took center stage again. People longed for wonder, for tales of the unknown, for evidence that the world was far more magical than the cold calculations of science suggested. And in this new cultural atmosphere, the legend of Atlantis experienced a powerful rebirth. Romanticism celebrated the beauty of ruins, the mystery of nature, and the idea that ancient civilizations might have possessed secrets long forgotten by modern society. Poets, painters, and philosophers turned their gaze toward the distant past, fascinated by the grandeur of Egypt, the myths of Mesopotamia, and the fated glory of Greece and Rome. Atlantis fit perfectly into this longing. It was the ultimate lost world, not just forgotten ruins, but an entire civilization swallowed by the sea. It symbolized both the fragility of human achievement and the possibility of greatness beyond imagination. Writers of the era seized upon the myth. Novels, poems, and plays placed Atlantis at the heart of romantic adventure. It was portrayed as a utopia of wisdom and harmony, or as a decadent empire whose hubris had led to its downfall. In either case, it was the perfect backdrop for tales of mystery, tragedy, and discovery. The legend became less a historical question and more a cultural obsession, a canvas upon which dreams and fears could be painted. At the same time, the 19th century was also an age of rapid scientific discovery. Geology, archaeology, and anthropology were developing as modern disciplines. Fossils were being uncovered, ancient ruins were being excavated, and new theories about Earth's history were being debated. Against this backdrop, some thinkers attempted to combine science with the legend of Atlantis. They argued that Plato's story might correspond to real geological events, such as earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or sudden floods. With every new discovery about the forces of nature, the possibility of a sunken continent seemed more plausible. This was also the age of pseudoscience, theories that claimed the authority of science but were driven more by speculation than evidence. Atlantis was an irresistible subject for such ideas. One of the most influential figures was Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman and writer who published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, in 1882. Donnelly's book became one of the most widely read works on the subject and shaped popular imagination for generations. In his book, Donnelly argued that Atlantis was not just real, but the origin of all known civilizations. According to him, the knowledge, myths, and technologies of the ancient world, from Egypt to India to the Americas, all traced back to Atlantis. He suggested that the flood myths found in cultures worldwide were memories of Atlantis's destruction. Even the biblical story of Noah, he claimed, was simply another version of the Atlantean catastrophe. Donnelly's ideas were bold and speculative, but they appealed to a public hungry for mystery and eager to believe that humanity's origins were far grander than conventional science admitted. He presented Atlantis not as a mere curiosity, but as the missing key to human history. To him, it explained everything: pyramids, myths, languages, even the spread of agriculture. While scholars dismissed his theories as imaginative rather than scientific, readers embraced them with enthusiasm. The impact of Donnelly's work cannot be overstated. For many, it was the first time they encountered the idea of Atlantis as a real place that had influenced the entire world.
And is 5 the feeble fugitives and music?
Some linked it to the lost tribes of Israel, others to the origins of the Aryan race, and still others to spiritual traditions that claimed Atlantis had been a center of mystical wisdom. Theosophy, a religious movement founded by Helena Blavatsky, incorporated Atlantis into its teachings, describing it as a stage in humanity's spiritual evolution. In her vision, Atlanteans were both advanced and flawed, their downfall serving as a lesson for the present age. Such ideas blurred the line between history, myth, and belief. To believers, Atlantis was not just a story, but a profound truth about human origins and destiny. To skeptics, it was a fantasy dressed up as science, but either way, it had become impossible to ignore. The 19th century turned Atlantis into a household word, a symbol of lost greatness, mystery, and possibility. Meanwhile, archaeology was making real discoveries that added fuel to the fire. The uncovering of Troy, long considered a myth, showed that stories dismissed as legends could sometimes be based on real places. This inspired hope that Atlantis, too, might one day be found. Discoveries of ancient ruins in Central America and Mesopotamia only heightened the excitement, as if the world was slowly giving up its secrets. Every new temple, every uncovered artifact seemed to whisper of civilizations lost to time, and perhaps to the sea. By the end of the 19th century, Atlantis had become something far more than a passage in Plato's dialogues. It was a cultural phenomenon, woven into literature, science, religion, and popular imagination. The romantic longing for mystery had merged with the new sciences and with pseudo-scientific speculation to create a vision of Atlantis as both a real historical place and a symbol of humanity's forgotten past. This vision carried into the 20th century, where Atlantis would inspire even more daring theories, from ancient astronauts to psychic visions. But its modern rebirth began in the 19th century, in an age when ruins and mysteries were celebrated, when science and imagination often walked hand in hand, and when people longed to believe that the world still held secrets waiting to be discovered. In the Romantic era, Atlantis was no longer just a cautionary tale of hubris told by Plato. It was a dream of lost wisdom, of hidden civilizations, of humanity's forgotten greatness. And once that dream took hold, it proved impossible to wake from. The 20th century opened with incredible changes. Technology was advancing at a breathtaking pace. Airplanes, radio, automobiles, and later, television. Wars shook the world, empires collapsed, and new nations were born. At the same time, science was reshaping humanity's understanding of the universe, from the theory of relativity to the discovery of DNA. In this age of progress and upheaval, the myth of Atlantis did not fade. Instead, it transformed once again, adapting to the modern world and finding new life in science fiction, occult teachings, and conspiracy theories. For many writers and thinkers, Atlantis became a symbol of a forgotten advanced civilization, one that might even have surpassed modern humanity in knowledge and technology. This idea resonated in a century obsessed with invention and fearful of destruction. If Atlantis had once existed, perhaps it had been destroyed by the very forces of progress, weapons, machines, or knowledge too powerful for its people to control. The rise of modern warfare, with its bombs and later nuclear weapons, gave Plato's warning about hubris a terrifying new relevance. One of the most influential movements to embrace Atlantis in the 20th century was the Theosophical Society. Building on earlier writings, especially those of Helena Blavatsky, Theosophists described Atlantis as a key stage in human spiritual evolution. According to their teachings, the Atlanteans were a race of beings who possessed psychic powers and advanced knowledge, but who fell into corruption and self-destruction. Their downfall, Theosophists claimed, was both a literal catastrophe and a spiritual lesson for humanity. This mystical vision spread far beyond the small circle of theosophy. New Age thinkers, spiritualists, and occult writers all incorporated Atlantis into their systems of belief. In this version of the myth, Atlantis was not just a lost civilization, it was a source of hidden wisdom, waiting to be rediscovered by those open to spiritual truth. Atlantean survivors, according to some teachings, had passed down fragments of their knowledge to Egypt, Tibet, and other ancient cultures, keeping alive the memory of their greatness. At the same time, Atlantis captured the imagination of popular culture through literature and, later, film. Science fiction writers especially found the idea irresistible. They envisioned Atlanteans as masters of technology, inventors of machines that could harness the power of the earth, the sky, or even the mind. In these stories, Atlantis was sometimes a utopia destroyed by natural disaster, and sometimes a cautionary tale of arrogance, war, and collapse. The image of Atlantis also began to merge with new theories about the ancient world.
As archaeology uncovered the ruins of Minoan Crete and other Bronze Age civilizations, some scholars suggested that these real societies might have inspired Plato's tale.
The eruption of the volcano Thera, modern-day Santorini, which devastated the Minoan civilization around 1600 BC, seemed to echo Plato's account of a sudden catastrophe.
Though many academics remained cautious, the idea that Atlantis might correspond to a real event gained traction in the popular imagination.
But alongside serious hypotheses, wild speculation flourished. Writers linked Atlantis to nearly every mystery of the past. Some claimed that the pyramids of Egypt and Mesoamerica were the work of Atlantean engineers. Others suggested that Atlantis had been the cradle of advanced sciences, from astronomy to medicine, which later civilizations had only partially inherited. Still others connected Atlantis to biblical stories, ancient aliens, or hidden races living beneath the earth. In the age of mass media, these ideas spread widely. Movies, pulp magazines, and later television shows brought Atlantis into the living rooms of millions. Sometimes it was portrayed as a majestic underwater city, glowing with crystal towers and futuristic technology. Other times it was a dark warning, a civilization destroyed by its own pride. For children and adults alike, Atlantis became part of the collective imagination, a story that could be retold in endless ways. The darker side of Atlantis also emerged during the 20th century. In the years leading up to World War II, some racial theorists twisted the myth to support their ideologies. They claimed that Atlanteans were the ancestors of specific races, portraying themselves as inheritors of a lost master civilization. This misuse of the myth lent Atlantis a disturbing role in propaganda, turning a story of human imagination into a weapon of division. After the war, such ideas were largely discredited, but they showed how powerful and dangerous myths could become when tied to ideology. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories gave Atlantis yet another life. Some claimed that governments and scientists were hiding proof of the lost civilization. Others believed that sunken ruins found by divers in places like the Bahamas or the Mediterranean were evidence of Atlantis deliberately suppressed by the mainstream. The rise of UFO culture in the mid-20th century added a new twist. Perhaps Atlantis had been connected to extraterrestrials. Ancient astronaut theories suggested that aliens had visited Earth long ago, helping to build Atlantis, and that its destruction was linked to cosmic battles or lost technologies. For skeptics, Atlantis remained a myth, an allegory created by Plato and exaggerated over centuries. But even skeptics had to admit the myth's power. It had survived for over 2,000 years, adapting to every age, from Greek philosophy to Renaissance utopias, from Enlightenment science to romantic dreams. In the 20th century, it became part of global popular culture, appearing in novels, films, comics, and eventually video games. Few myths could boast such resilience. By the end of the century, Atlantis had become almost impossible to separate from modern fantasy. It was a place where advanced technology, spiritual wisdom, and ancient mysteries all converged. To some, it was still a cautionary tale about pride and destruction. To others, it was a beacon of hope, proof that humanity once reached heights of greatness and might do so again. And for millions more, it was simply an adventure, a stage for stories of discovery, heroism, and wonder. As the 20th century closed, the legend of Atlantis stood at a crossroads. On one side, archaeology and science continued to search for real explanations, from natural disasters like volcanic eruptions to misinterpretations of geography. On the other, imagination continued to transform the lost civilization into whatever people needed it to be, a warning, a dream, or a mystery. In the modern world of technology, war, and global change, Atlantis remained timeless. The myth had survived philosophy, religion, science, and pseudoscience. It had endured through centuries of skepticism and belief. And as humanity entered the 21st century, Atlantis was more alive than ever, ready to inspire new stories, new theories, and new quests for truth. The 21st century has not diminished humanity's fascination with Atlantis. If anything, modern technology, underwater exploration, and the internet have given the myth a fresh burst of energy. While most academics still treat the story as a fable created by Plato, new discoveries beneath the sea and advances in archaeology have kept the possibility alive in the public imagination. And for many, Atlantis is no longer just a story of the past. It has become a symbol of humanity's continuing search for mystery in an increasingly mapped and measured world. One of the driving forces of modern speculation is underwater archaeology. The ocean covers more than 70% of Earth's surface, and vast areas remain unexplored. This mystery provides fertile ground for theories. If entire mountain ranges can lie hidden beneath the waves, why not the remains of a lost civilization? The sheer scale of the unknown keeps the question alive. Could Atlantis still be out there, waiting to be discovered? Over the last few decades, divers and researchers have uncovered remarkable underwater sites that have fueled these speculations. One of the most famous is the Yonaguni Monument near Japan, a massive rock formation discovered in the 1980s. Its sharp angles and stepped terraces look man-made, leading some to argue it was once part of an ancient city that sank into the sea. While most geologists believe the structures are natural formations shaped by tectonic activity, others remain convinced they are evidence of a forgotten civilization. Inevitably, the Yonaguni Monument has been linked to Atlantis in popular imagination, even though it lies far from the Atlantic Ocean. Similar claims have been made about structures in the Bahamas, particularly the so-called Bimini Road. In 1968, divers discovered a line of large rectangular stones off the coast of Bimini Island. To some, these stones looked like a road or wall, possibly built by an ancient people. The discovery gained attention in part because it matched a prediction made by the American psychic Edgar Cayce decades earlier, who claimed Atlantis would rise again near the Bahamas in the late 20th century. Scientists, however, generally explain the Bimini Road as a natural formation of beach rock fractured over time. Still, the allure of Cayce's prophecy and the mystery of the stones have made Bimini one of the most famous Atlantean sites. Beyond these controversial discoveries, there have been countless reports of ruins, pyramids, or roads spotted beneath the ocean through sonar scans or satellite imagery. Many of these turn out to be natural formations or illusions caused by light and shadow. But in the public imagination, each report rekindles hope that the lost city is real. The internet has amplified this effect, allowing images, videos, and theories to spread instantly across the world. Atlantis has become one of the most enduring subjects in online forums, documentaries, and speculative research. At the same time, serious archaeology has continued to explore possible historical roots for Plato's tale. The eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, remains one of the most widely supported candidates. Around 1600 BCE, this volcanic explosion devastated the Minoan civilization, which had built advanced cities, impressive art, and complex trade networks. The destruction was sudden and catastrophic, involving fire, ash, earthquakes, and tsunamis. For many, the parallels with Plato's description of Atlantis are striking. The Minoans even had connections to Egypt, from where Plato claimed his story originated. While not everyone agrees with this interpretation, it remains the most academically respected theory. Other theories place Atlantis in different parts of the world. Some argue it was in Spain, pointing to the marshlands of Donana near Cadiz, where concentric circular patterns have been detected beneath the earth. Others suggest locations in the Caribbean, the Azores, or even Antarctica. Each theory has its advocates and its evidence, though none have been definitively proven. The search has become global, reflecting both the diversity of interpretations and the enduring desire to locate the legendary city. Meanwhile, the image of Atlantis has become central to popular culture. From blockbuster movies and novels to video games and television series, the lost civilization appears again and again. often reimagined to fit modern themes. Sometimes, it is portrayed as a high-tech utopia, powered by mysterious energy sources. Other times, as a decadent empire whose downfall mirrors modern fears of environmental collapse or nuclear war. Atlantis has become a mirror in which society projects its hopes and anxieties, a story that changes with each generation. In recent decades, scientists have also uncovered evidence of massive ancient floods and sea level rises at the end of the last ice age around 12,000 years ago, the same period Plato gave for Atlantis's destruction. When the ice sheets melted, vast areas of land were submerged, including fertile plains where humans may once have lived. This has inspired speculation that Plato's story could be a memory, however distorted, of real events during that time. Though mainstream scholars remain cautious, the connection between post-Ice Age floods and Atlantis continues to intrigue both researchers and the public. What makes Atlantis especially enduring in the modern age is its adaptability. It is not just a lost city, it can be a warning about environmental disaster, a dream of hidden wisdom, or even a metaphor for forgotten histories waiting to be uncovered. For some, it represents humanity's eternal desire to seek what lies beyond the horizon. For others, it is proof that myths may contain kernels of truth. And for many, it is simply an adventure, a mystery that refuses to be solved, keeping imagination alive in a world that sometimes feels too well mapped. Despite centuries of searching, no definitive evidence of Atlantis has been found. Yet perhaps that is why the story survives. If Atlantis had already been discovered, its mystery would vanish, replaced by museum displays and academic debates. Instead, it lives on as a possibility, always out of reach, always waiting, always just beyond the known. The legend has proven more powerful than any single explanation, capable of inspiring explorers, scientists, mystics, and dreamers alike. As technology advances and humanity continues to map the oceans, new discoveries will surely emerge. Whether they confirm or disprove the existence of Atlantis, the fascination will remain. For even if the city itself never existed, it exists in our minds as a symbol of lost knowledge, of human ambition, and of the mysteries that still lie hidden beneath the waves. In today's world, Atlantis has transcended the boundaries of legend and entered almost every form of cultural expression. It is no longer just a story of a lost city beneath the sea. It has become a symbol, a metaphor, and even a brand, shaping how we think about the past, the future, and our souls. Unlike other myths that remain confined to books of mythology, Atlantis is everywhere, in movies, music, video games, tourism, and even science. Its resilience as a cultural symbol reveals not only our fascination with mystery, but also our deep need for stories that connect us to the unknown. One of the most visible places where Atlantis appears today is in entertainment. Hollywood films frequently use the lost city as a setting for adventure. Sometimes Atlantis is imagined as a gleaming underwater kingdom with futuristic technology and crystal energy sources. Other times it is portrayed as a crumbling ruin, haunted by secrets and dangers. Animated movies, action films, and superhero franchises have all drawn upon the legend, introducing new generations to the idea that somewhere, hidden beneath the waves, lies a civilization greater than our own. Television and documentaries also keep the legend alive. Channels dedicated to history, exploration, and mystery often revisit Atlantis, presenting new theories or speculative discoveries. While scholars may criticize the lack of evidence, the popularity of such programs shows how strongly the idea resonates. Atlantis functions as both history and myth, fact and fiction, allowing audiences to explore questions of human origins, lost knowledge, and catastrophic change. Video games, too, have embraced Atlantis. Many popular titles use it as a backdrop for quests, battles, and exploration. In these virtual worlds, players dive beneath the ocean to uncover ruins, fight guardians of ancient knowledge, or wield Atlantean technology. For gamers, Atlantis is not just a story but an interactive experience, a place they can visit, explore, and do say. It can be painted with the same source of characters and weakness of culture. This has given the myth new life among younger audiences who may never have read Plato, but who understand the allure of a lost world. Beyond entertainment, Atlantis has become part of tourism and marketing. Resorts, hotels, and water parks often borrow the name Atlantis to suggest luxury, mystery, and wonder. For example, massive resorts in the Bahamas and Dubai use the theme of a sunken city to attract visitors, blending mythology with leisure. Guests swim among aquariums designed like ruins, walk through halls decorated with murals of gods and kings, and dine in restaurants surrounded by images of oceanic grandeur. Here, Atlantis is not just a story, it is an experience for sale, a fantasy world designed to be lived, if only for a few days. In literature and art, Atlantis continues to inspire as a metaphor. Writers use it to represent lost potential, forgotten histories, or the fragility of human achievement. Poets and painters evoke Atlantis when describing worlds of beauty destroyed by time. For many, the city symbolizes the dream of perfection undone by human flaws, a warning that greatness can vanish in an instant. In this way, Atlantis has become as much a moral lesson as a myth, speaking to the challenges of modern society: environmental collapse, climate change, war, and technological overreach. Science has also found ways to engage with Atlantis, though often cautiously. Oceanographers and archaeologists study submerged landscapes, searching for evidence of ancient human settlements, now hidden beneath the waves. While most scientists do not believe Atlantis existed as Plato described, the search itself raises valuable questions about history. Could myths preserve memories of real events, like massive floods at the end of the Ice Age? But could early civilizations have been more complex than we currently understand? These questions keep researchers intrigued, blurring the line between legend and possibility. In modern spirituality and New Age thought, Atlantis remains a source of fascination. Many believe it was a place of advanced wisdom where people mastered energies and technologies now forgotten. Some claim to recall past lives in Atlantis or receive messages from Atlantean guides through meditation. Others see the myth as symbolic of a golden age humanity must rediscover, a vision of harmony between technology, nature, and spirit. While skeptics dismiss these beliefs, they reveal how Atlantis has evolved into more than a lost city. It is now a spiritual archetype. In politics and environmental discourse, Atlantis is often used as a metaphor for collapse. Writers compare modern nations to the Atlanteans, warning that arrogance, greed, and misuse of resources could lead to disaster. Rising sea levels caused by climate change give the legend new urgency as cities around the world face the threat of being submerged. In this context, Atlantis becomes a prophecy, a story from the past that reflects the dangers of the present and the possible fate of the future. What is remarkable about Atlantis in the modern age is its flexibility. It can be a cautionary tale, a spiritual truth, a tourist attraction, or an adventure story. It belongs to no single culture, religion, or ideology. Instead, it shifts according to human imagination, serving whatever purpose we need it to. This adaptability ensures that the myth will not fade, even as our world continues to change. As we look to the future, it is likely that Atlantis will remain a powerful cultural symbol. Advances in technology, from deep-sea exploration to artificial intelligence, may inspire new interpretations of the legend. Perhaps future generations will imagine Atlantis as a warning against the misuse of genetic engineering or artificial intelligence, just as earlier generations saw it as a warning about war or nuclear weapons. In virtual reality, Atlantis may become a fully immersive world, allowing people to visit the city in ways never before possible. And in the search for life beyond Earth, some may compare exoplanets to Atlantis, lost worlds waiting to be found. Ultimately, Atlantis endures because it touches something universal: the longing for a perfect world, the fear of losing it, and the hope that such a world might one day be found again. It is a myth that reflects our highest dreams and our deepest anxieties. Whether as a real city, a metaphor, or a fantasy, Atlantis will continue to inspire humanity. For as long as we wonder about what lies beyond the horizon, beneath the sea, or within our own past, the legend of Atlantis will never truly be lost. As we reach the end of our journey into the mystery of Atlantis, one question remains: why does this story continue to matter? Why, after more than 2,000 years, does a tale first told by an ancient philosopher still captivate minds and hearts across the globe? The answer lies not only in the search for a lost city, but in what Atlantis represents to humanity. Atlantis is more than ruins beneath the ocean. It is an idea, one that has evolved with every generation that has heard it. To Plato, it was a warning about the dangers of pride, wealth, and unchecked ambition. To explorers of the Renaissance, it was a promise of undiscovered lands across the horizon. To modern seekers, it is both a symbol of advance and a total of Indian death, a life for the time. As days preaching the antiquities of the Southwest mystery, Zephyros found it. The city may or may not have existed, but its meaning is undeniably real. Part of the power of Atlantis comes from the ocean itself. The sea is vast, mysterious, and unknowable. Even today, with satellites orbiting above and robots diving into the depths, much of the ocean remains unexplored. The possibility that something as grand as Atlantis could lie hidden beneath the waves keeps the imagination alive. Unlike myths tied to mountains or deserts we can easily visit, Atlantis is always just out of reach, cloaked in the endless blue of the sea. It exists in that perfect space between possibility and impossibility, not proven, not disproven. The story also speaks to something deeply human: the rise and fall of civilizations. History is filled with examples of empires that once seemed invincible, but later crumbled into dust. Egypt, Rome, the Maya, the Khmer Empire, and many more. Atlantis reflects this cycle on a mythical scale, showing how even the greatest can fall in a single night. In this way, the legend is both cautionary and universal. It's a strange thing about people who,
It reminds us that no civilization is eternal, and that human hubris can lead to destruction. But Atlantis is not only about loss, it is also about hope. To many, the idea that such a magnificent civilization once existed inspires belief in human potential. If people thousands of years ago could achieve wonders, then perhaps we too can rise to greater heights. For those who dream of progress, Atlantis is not just a warning, but a vision of what humanity might one day become. A civilization of beauty, knowledge, and harmony. This dual nature, both warning and inspiration, explains why Atlantis continues to resonate today. In a world facing climate change, political unrest, and rapid technological growth, the story feels more relevant than ever. Some see in it a mirror of our own age, a reminder that our choices determine whether we thrive or fall. Others find in it the promise that even if knowledge is lost, it can someday be rediscovered. Atlantis challenges us to ask, Are we building a future that will last? Or are we repeating the mistakes of the past?
There is also a timeless allure in the possibility of discovery. Humanity has always been drawn to the unknown, to new continents, distant planets, and uncharted depths. Atlantis represents the ultimate mystery, a treasure hunt across time and imagination. Even if it is never found, the search itself drives exploration and creativity. It pushes scientists to map the ocean floor, storytellers to craft new myths, and dreamers to look beyond the familiar. Atlantis lives in the act of seeking itself. In art, literature, film, and music, Atlantis has become a canvas on which humanity paints its deepest desires and fears. Whether imagined as a utopia of wisdom or a doomed empire of excess, the legend adapts to the times. It is a myth that never grows old because it changes with us. Every generation creates its own Atlantis, shaped by its own hopes and anxieties. Perhaps this is why Atlantis still matters. It is not a fixed story, but a living one. It does not belong to Plato, to scholars, or to adventurers alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever wondered about the mysteries of the past or dreamed about the possibilities of the future. In Atlantis, we see both the fragility and the greatness of human civilization, a reminder that what we build can be lost, but also that what we imagine can endure forever.
So, was Atlantis real? Maybe it was a city swallowed by the sea. Maybe it was a memory of ancient floods. Maybe it was only a story told to illustrate a point about human nature.
In the end, the truth may not matter as much as the meaning we give it. For Atlantis is real in the way that myths are real, shaping our thoughts, inspiring our creativity, and reminding us of truths that transcend history. The legend of Atlantis continues because we need it. We need mysteries that keep us searching, stories that remind us of humility, and visions that inspire us to dream, whether hidden beneath the waves or forever beyond reach. Atlantis survives as long as we imagine it. And perhaps that is the greatest treasure of all. The story of Atlantis has echoed across centuries, whispered through myths, scriptures, and the imagination of humankind. What began with Plato's dialogues was never just a tale of a city. It was a mirror held up to humanity, a reminder of both our brilliance and our fragility. Imagine for a moment a civilization that had mastered the seas, built temples higher than the clouds, and harnessed powers we can only speculate about. A culture so advanced, yet so confident in its own permanence, that it believed the ocean itself could never claim it. But history, or legend, teaches us otherwise. Atlantis, according to the old words, did not fall to an enemy's sword, nor to famine, nor to time. It was swallowed whole, vanishing beneath the waves in a single night. Some say it was punishment by the gods for pride and corruption. Others believe it was a natural disaster, a violent quake or a monstrous wave that wiped away the greatest empire of its age. And still others argue Atlantis never existed at all, that it is merely an allegory, a warning wrapped in story. But does the truth matter less because it hides in mystery? For every diver who descends into the depths, for every explorer who scans the ocean floor, for every dreamer who looks out at the horizon, Atlantis is alive. It is alive in our curiosity, in the longing to uncover what we lost, in the eternal question, could it have been real?